So, how should professionals think about CAMS?
One of the ways that we found very helpful in reflecting on therapies, including CAMS, complementary and alternative medicines, is to analyze the thinking behind them using the International Classification of Functioning, or ICF Framework. When one does this, one finds, as we've done in a recent paper, one of my students and I did, that much of the thinking and many of the assumptions about CAMS are that they will address and fix the body structure and function issues that are underlying the problem with cerebral palsy or autism or other impairments. And it's very useful to see both how they're thinking about that and what evidence they have to show that there are changes in functioning and in participation. And sadly, when one does that kind of analysis, one usually finds that there may be changes in body structure and function, but there's no evidence that there are improvements in functioning, which is really what people are interested in.
Great. How might policymakers approach the demand that they fund and support CAMS?
Well, in publicly funded systems such as we have in Canada, we've had a very powerful and I think very useful illustration of this. In 1998, there was a great deal of excitement in Canada, and particularly in the province of Quebec, about hyperbaric oxygen. The testimonials that led to this excitement prompted parents to demand that the Quebec government, which funds healthcare in that province, start funding hyperbaric oxygen. And the government very wisely said that they would fund a study that could evaluate the claims that were being made on the basis of an anecdote, and that they would be guided by the findings of the study. In my opinion, the hyperbaric oxygen study done by Dr. Collet and his colleagues, published in Lancet in 2001, is probably the best randomized clinical trial ever done in our field of cerebral palsy, and showed very clearly in a multi-blinded study that there was absolutely no benefit of hyperbaric oxygen compared to a sham treatment, with everybody except the technicians being blinded to which children were receiving hyperbaric oxygen as prescribed at the time and which were receiving the sham treatment. And the government then made the decision, as they had promised to do, to be guided by the results of the findings of the study and not fund it. That hasn't stopped people promoting it, claiming that the study was flawed and so on. But a careful reading of that study shows that it was very well done and the results were unequivocally not different in the two groups. In other places, governments have acceded to the pressure from families and funded treatments of questionable value. And once they're funded, the government has a tiger by the tail because it's very hard to change that approach to treatment unless something better comes along.
What do CAMS tell us about conventional approaches to treatments?
It's very interesting to recognize that before we get too hot under the collar about the claims being made by proponents of complementary and alternative medicines, that we need to look at what we're doing and look at the evidence for what it is we're doing. And when we do that, we become a little more humble. So I think that CAMS provide for us a challenge to think about everything we do, including the alternative therapies that are being promoted and the conventional therapies that we recommend, and to think about what evidence we have for their benefit. In a changing world, and I alluded to this earlier, where we are thinking more about the International Classification of Functioning framework and thinking about what outcomes we're interested in, we probably need to focus much more on functioning and participation and less on body structure and function. And one powerful example of that is the study done by Palmer and company, published in the New England Journal in March 1988, of a randomized trial of NDT therapy and a learning games early intervention program. And surprisingly, the children in the early intervention program did better at 6 months and 12 months than the children receiving NDT therapy. That was an unexpected finding. It was probably expected that the children would do less well because the NDT therapy was the treatment of choice at the time, and in some places still is. But the reality is that focusing on child development and promoting function appears to make quite a big difference. And that means that we need to be thinking about what outcomes we're interested in and not simply be focusing on the biomedical dimensions of an impairment. So to summarize, complementary and alternative therapies are here to stay. They are ever evolving. There are always new ones. And the ways in which we think about them, the ways in which we advise parents and policymakers should be informed by current thinking, current frameworks, and of course, at the end of the day, evidence. I'd like to thank my colleague, Taya, for asking questions which allowed me to focus my remarks this morning. Thank you.